All right, I think I finished it. I think I fixed it. Hold on.
By the way, I'm smoking a plum pudding by the Seattle Pipe Club. And it's very rich. Okay, I'll stop.
Seattle Pipe. No, it's okay. I think I fixed it. I think.
Carl knows why we're here.
I'm starting like Twitch is active. It's working on Twitch. It's working on the video game channel, but it's not working on YouTube for some reason. Nope, it's live on YouTube now. All right, we fixed it.
Hey, Kenneth. Carl, you're going to have to tell me why we're here. Why are we here?
Irish whisk tobacco. That sounds pretty good, actually. I have to say. Every week there's a friggin' technical problem, especially if I am on Restream. Every week they do this to me.
So what are you going to do? Are you going to go back to StreamYard?
Maybe. Well, I mean, I don't want to pay for it. That's always been the problem. If my audio is bad, by the way, I don't mind the video hitching so much, but if the audio sucks,
yeah, you know, you could change your video setting to 720, eh?
I could, and actually, for what we're doing here, I think that would actually be fine. It is 7.
And you're good. You're not good, but you're good.
Oh, Restream. All right. So anyway, Kyle, you did miss the New World stream. It was last night. I might stream some more tonight. We'll see. I've got stuff to do. I'll probably get killed a lot, though. Anyway, the whole point
By the way, Artie, you made a mistake because you spelled indisputable, indeputable. It's not happening, Artie.
It's indisputably correct.
It's indisputably.
I cut and pasted it all over the place, actually.
Oh man. So how was your day, Artie?
The rest of the day went great. What can I say? I don't know why this is happening, for Pete's sake. I'm
assuming when everybody says for Pete's sake, they're talking about Pete, the St. Peter.
Pete. I think so, actually. I think colloquially that is where it comes. I fixed the title now.
I love that guy's name, Bend Over. I love it.
Bend Over. Anyway, keep posting the link. Let me
Peach Menge.
All right.
Someone just posted.
That was me. This will lead people to the right stream on YouTube anyway. So problem might be on my side. I'm having not amazing connectivity today. So anyway, the point was that there are some things that are this also came up in a discussion about victory conditions that was happening on Twitter, right? Our friend of the channel's Pat Mullen mentioned that some of the traditional DNSing just use common sense type rules pop up across the various DNSing systems. Okay, and I don't know. I know Pat doesn't like that, but I also think that in some ways the whether that's important or not depends on who you talk to, right? And it depends on the topic, frankly. So, for example, one of the things that Dean has said once or twice. By the way, for those who don't know, let me say that Dean's wife passed away after a long battle with cancer a few days ago. Yeah, several years. And so our heartfelt commiserations go out to Dean and his friends and family.
Absolutely.
Because that's something that nobody should ever have to go through, and that aside. But anyway, that's not why this came up. So in some sense, depending on the thing that the game is about, it may be that when it's over, you know who won. You don't have to calculate victory points or anything like that. You know who won, right? But in another game, imagine, say, Empire of the Sun, right? Where the designer, Mark Herman, of course, had to go to some lengths to tailor victory conditions that he felt were historically plausible, but also meaningful in the context of, hey, this is a game and they're supposed to be, it's, you know, in some measure, it's competitive, right? And in Mark's view, and I'm inclined to agree with Mark in this case, that in an absolute sense of, like, you know, the man in the high castle type sense with the Japanese invading the Pacific coast, that's not a historically plausible end game for a Pacific War game, right? Even though you can do it, there's various games that you can absolutely do that kind of thing, and you can certainly do it in World in Flames.
Well, you can't
but it may or may not be smart to do it, but you can.
You can't do it on Empire of the Sun?
No, the U.S. East Coast, West Coast isn't even in the game.
Okay.
It is not going to happen. So the victory conditions in Empire of the Sun are essentially that the Japanese are able to prolong the Pacific War enough that the Americans accept the idea that there will be a negotiated peace with the Japanese that will allow the Japanese to retain some of those aggression acquisitions that they had acquired, right? That's maybe possible, right? But it's certainly not okay, the Japanese were victorious in the Pacific War, right? Those are not the same things. So the Jeff, I apologize. I apologize to everyone for the technical problems and the bad name of the stream. We fixed this too. I'll try and fix it again.
I'm really enjoying this tobacco. You know, I got all the windows open. I'm freezing.
I'm really $1 a month for. For those curious, StreamYard is not cheaper.
I know, but you can get the free one. Why don't you do the free thing?
Well, there's a free thing of YouTube as well, of a Restream as well. It's just a little more limited than if I was on the free plan. I'd be using StreamYard. I will say that there are fewer technical problems with StreamYard with Restream, and I am probably immediately after we end this stream, I'm going to cancel Restream because I'm tired of the problem. It's the same price, right? If I want to pay this $50, whatever it is a month, I can pay Restream that money and not have any technical problems, as opposed to Restream, where I was streaming last night, which that didn't work either. So I can, StreamYard will do that. They'll do the same thing. So anyway, we'll fix that. The only thing we would lose is the cool, but I am streaming on both YouTube channels, which is fine. That's not a big deal. I just don't want to not be streaming on the correct channel. That's what I'm concerned about. I can always delete videos, right? That's not a problem. Anyway, I keep trying to fix them. They keep making it worse. There's now 3 streams, none of which are the right stream. So what I will do is I will download the video from Twitch, which I can do, and then I will upload it to the regular YouTube channel so people can watch it after the fact. See, we should have you shouldn't have missed last week. Of course, this week was my week anyway, so
I'm sorry.
It happens. It's all fine. Hey, my wife got promoted today.
Big bucks.
Fantastic news. Yeah, big
awesome.
bucks. Like a 20% salary increase. Yeah, I'd say so.
Are you guys going to go out to dinner or something?
Oh, probably.
And what kind of dinner are you going to have, Artie?
Oh, we're going to go to wherever she wants to go because it's her promotion.
That's right.
So that will probably be Italian, would be my guess. So,
hey, I like her.
So she loves Italian food. She can't eat it that often because of the starch, but
yeah, I know, man. Gas, big time gas.
Yeah. Oh my God. I bought a whole baguette and ate the whole baguette in like 2 days. And I was lighting this place up. I got to fix the roof now. It was so bad. Anyway. So that's actually, John Longshore mentions the Japanese incendiary balloons. Those balloons were actually responsible for the only war fatalities on the American mainland in World War II. There was something landed in Oregon or someplace like that, and some kids or teenagers or somebody went to investigate it, and it blew up. So there's all that. My wife is Mexican, but and she loves Mexican food too, to be honest about it. But
authentic Mexican.
We don't have authentic Mexican in Ohio. We simply do not. We have great Tex-Mex. You can get very good Tex-Mex up here. I mean, but not as good as in Tex or Mex. But you get pretty good Tex-Mex here, and you can get we get authentic Mexican to the same extent we get authentic Chinese food, which is it's like Mexican food, but it's not. It's nothing like the food that I ate when I was in Mexico. So.
You were talking about Mark Simonich's 44, and I don't know why you said someone said it was a monster game.
People say that about Empire of the Sun. Empire of the Sun is, it's probably plays a little faster beginning to end. I'd say it's a 4 to 6 hour game, typically, Empire of the Sun. I think if you know what you're doing, which is it's a difficult game to learn. That's another story. But it's one map. It's a counter sheet and a half. Some of the counters are big, so it's not even as many counters as that makes it sound like.
So why don't you
Purple Northman's in Arizona? Yeah, you got great Mexican down there. You got it's the Southwest states will have a better selection of Mexican food than we get up here in Ohio.
See, Carl says you don't want authentic Mexican. Trust me, Carl. What, you don't like tripe? You don't like tripe?
I didn't have tripe when I was down there. Food in Mexico is same as anything else. Food in Mexico is really regional. So you'll go to part of Mexico and the food will be quite different from the food in some other part of Mexico. So where we were it was a lot, at least in the restaurants, right? People might not eat like this at home. And that was my theory that that's the case. You go out to a restaurant, you want a big slab of meat. So what you would get in a restaurant is a big slab of meat, some tortillas, and a few kinds of salsa. And maybe a small salad at some places. Maybe
what about did you eat any huitlacoche?
That's you talking that freaky corn thing?
You got it, baby.
That is not so where I was for a couple of weeks in Mexico, you could get that, but I didn't have that because they took care of the food for. Yeah, I would love to have tried it actually. So I want to see Jeff Beeler's comment here. In any Pacific War game, can the Japanese not attack the U.S. and just the Dutch and British East Indies for the resources? So, yes, in Empire of the Sun's a bad example because in Empire of the Sun, it's one of the only things that I could think of where Empire of the Sun is a bad example. It's very tightly designed game, right? It narrowly focuses on the Pacific War. And the only sign you get that there's more war happening somewhere else is that little war in Europe track, okay? So it starts with Pearl Harbor. And if it starts with Pearl Harbor, then the U.S. is in the war, in which case you might as well not allow the U.S. to freely put a bunch of troops and air bases in the Philippines, right? Which is the territory that the American territory that we're talking about, other than like some of the islands, all right? So on the other hand, if the game starts before December 1941, and you have a sort of a wider strategic panel of opportunities in front of you, then maybe you can. But most games will have some kind of mechanism in that'd be like a world tension index or a U.S. entry index. In World in Flames, there's a chit pool. You keep drawing these chits as the Japanese do things and the Germans do things. You keep drawing these U.S. entry chits and put those U.S. entry chits is the wrong word for them, but that's what they're called. And you put them in two different pools, one for war with the Japanese. So eventually the Americans can declare war on you whether you attacked them or not. So then that simulates, in a way, it simulates like the Germans declare, well, the U.S. is in the war. We got to declare war on them because they're going to be shooting at us, right? So that they're in the war. They're in the war. So yeah, that is a thing that there's tons of Pacific War games that do reflect that, but those tend to be Pacific War games that either start earlier than 1941, and there are some, like Axis Empire's Daisenso starts in 1937, I believe. And you can absolutely never attack the U.S., but if you don't, the U.S. will eventually attack you. And that's an accurate reflection of the geopolitical situation in the late 30s and early 40s in the Pacific sphere, right? The Japanese kept attacking stuff, and that kept making the U.S. mad because of U.S. financial interests in places like China. So
So what says that if Japan doesn't attack, the U.S. is going to attack?
Well, that's the point. Is there in each game's we'll talk about Bob Kowalczyk's post here in a second. Each game it's different, but usually there's some kind of mechanism that says the U.S. will enter the war at some point. But exactly how that works depends on what game we're talking about.
Hey, Achilles, Tikanis.
So howdy, Achilles. Thanks for stopping by. So Bob Kowalczyk asks about the P500 system. Empire of the Sun made it, but it's been stuck in art and final development. So I imagine the problem here. I'm going to guess and say that the amount of new art and final development that needs to be done on Empire of the Sun is very small or zero. But that it's stuck there because GMT already has 50 things at the printer or on a boat or about to get on a boat. And if they send more stuff to the printer, it's just creating more backlog. So there's a bunch of stuff that is held up for that reason. Also, GMT's been backed up on their, on reprints, especially for a while. So how they prioritize this, I don't know. It was never going to be a not reprinted. That game is never going to be out of print for forever.
Hey, John Size here. Hey, John.
Speaking of the Philippines.
I actually met John Size.
I think, did you? Wasn't he at WBC?
That's right.
There you go. Yeah, that's because I know that because that's the only place you've been.
Thank you.
It's there and wherever they have the poutine. So, yeah, I think I remember this, that where you can't attack the Dutch East Indies and not attack the U.S., but that's also kind of a thought experiment too, and I wouldn't assume that it is. I wouldn't assume that it is necessarily as rich or balanced a game as the full Empire of the Sun. Cal Reese asks for VPG Battle for Moscow. So this is if we're hitched, we might be hitched again here. Thanks, Restream. Next week, we will not be on Restream anymore. So all these technical problems will go away. So sorry again. So Battle for Moscow was a Frank Chadwick game, originally released in the late 70s or early 80s as like an introduction to wargaming type of thing. I think it was given away. It was very small. It was reproduced by in an issue of C3I magazine, and it was also redone by Victory Point Games. And probably on that basis, Alan Emmerich, who was running Victory Point Games at the time, calls up Frank Chadwick and says, "Hey, Frank, wouldn't it be cool if we took your Battle for Moscow system and did the entire European war with it?" And that is essentially the Frank Chadwick's ETO system, which is Thunder in the East and whatever following volumes turn into.
You've played Thunder in the East?
I have, actually. I didn't get it, but we didn't. We started it like a month before the pandemic blew everything up. So I didn't get to see enough of it to have a firm opinion. There's definitely some neat stuff in it. I think has a lot of promise, but it's also being considerably revised, bearing in mind the subsequent volumes in the series.
Because Chadwick's been around a long time, man.
Oh yeah, since as a published designer since at least 1972. So.
Hey, wise guy, what's up?
So, Jeff, this is another thing that I've talked about. Paths of Glory is another example. European players often never see the Tsar fall or the U.S. end the war, and this is because it's Ted's opinion that those things were unlikely. They do happen in the game. They're not incredibly rare or anything like that, but you kind of have to set things up and then have things fall into position for U.S. entry or Russian collapse to occur. And they don't always happen. It's a good example of designer viewpoint influencing the design. So let's clarify this. Battle for Moscow, well, like I said, was intended as a introduction to war games. It's got like 2 or 4 pages of rules, right? It's super simple. Thunder in the East has a lot more going on. It started with the guts of it with the Battle for Moscow game system. But there is a lot more to Thunder in the East and ETO.
Hey, Tony.
So, yes, I agree.
Tony, what's up?
Tony from Tony's Board Life has joined us. So where in the world, I know he's in the U.S., but I don't know where Tony's at. So it might be a different time zone where he is. We are in the Eastern time zone. So once again, I apologize to everybody for the technical challenges. We will have those fixed next week. Anyway, so what else were we talking about here?
We were talking about the Simoniches.
There's a chip shortage too. Right. So the point was that, you know, what makes it a monster? To some people, the Dark Valley, Ted's the Dark Valley, which I have played, and which is very good, is not a monster. It's 2 maps and it takes quite a while to play. You can play it in a weekend, but it's not a one-sitting game. I guess it can be, but if it is, then it's because the harsh victory conditions have bit the Germans in the behind. So, but it's a big footprint game, right? It's 2 maps. That's a decent sized game. We played it at Buckeye Game Fest one year for 3 or 4 days and got to like mid 42. We were learning the game as we went. It all worked really well. But to some people, I mean, Marco Arnaudo said, hey, I think it's a monster game. So I'm not going to tell him he's wrong. It's up to us to decide whether we can accommodate that big a project in our lives or not. Now, here's another thing to think about. There's 2 other things to think about. One of which is playing monster games on Vassal, okay, where you could play it for months if you want, but you never have to physically set it up. So I don't have to like leave a room unoccupied for months at a time. The other thing is people who play other kinds of games that happens in a serial manner. I'm talking about role-playing games, okay? So let's say we're playing D&D. People come over to the house. We set it up. It takes 5 minutes. We play D&D for 3 or 5 or whatever it is hours, and then we put it all away, and everybody goes home, right? But it's not a different game every week. It's a continuation of the same game. It's a campaign, okay? We'll talk about Mike Anthony's Battle for Moscow 2 post in a minute here. I have a hunch that RPG players who are used to that format are also more willing to accommodate monster war games. The only difference being is that you can't put it all away at the end. You have to leave it set up unless you are using Vassal, in which case you can leave it set up in Vassal, in which case you don't have a problem. Let's address Mike Anthony's point here. This is true. This was released, I think last year sometime, and it was called Battle for Moscow 2. I don't know if you'll find it on BGG under that name, but what it basically is it's the Battle for Moscow situation played using Thunder in the East. So it's got a bunch of those Thunder in the East Chrome additions to the game system. So it's not as simple as Battle for Moscow, and it's not as complicated as the full Thunder in the East, which has a lot going on with population and all that stuff.
A lot of political stuff in Thunder in the East?
There's a little bit, yeah. But, I mean, production and stuff like that. John Sai says that later versions of Paths of Glory. My version of Paths of Glory is not super duper old. I wasn't aware that there had been that significant changes. But I am also not saying that John is wrong. I think I don't have the last. I think my edition of Paths of Glory is 2 editions old. Iggy Critical asks for 3-player hex and counter war games. There's plenty of 3-player games, and there's plenty of hex and counter war games. There's not that many 3-player hex and counter war games. Offhand, there's at least some ASL scenarios, believe it or not, that are intended for 3 players. There are a large number of games in which the sides split naturally into teams in a way that accommodates 3 players. So, for example, you can easily play, let's say, the Mighty Endeavor, where 1 player plays the Germans, 1 player plays the Western Allies, the other player plays the Soviets. That's not the scenario, by the way, but you can do it. You could do it that way very easily. The scenario is that it's the old Battle for Germany idea. So the 1 player plays the Western Allies and the Germans fighting the Soviets, and the other player plays the Soviets and the Germans fighting the Western Allies. That's a Dunnigan design innovation that happened with Battle for Germany. and one reason why Battle for Germany has remained in print for all these years.
But it's funny that there are not many 3-player hex and counter war games because I don't get it. Some guy can play the Soviets, one guy plays the Americans, another guy plays the Germans, another guy plays the Japs.
Well,
you know what I'm saying?
one example that is 3-sided is a lot of strategic level World War II games where there's an Axis side, a Western Allied side, and a Soviet side. Offhand, the Total Krieg games work that way. Triumph and Tragedy is not hex and counter. That's why I didn't want to count it.
Charles Latorre says Brotherhood and Unity. Compass is new game.
That's good call. That's point to point though. That's not hex and counter. But it is a 3-player. It is absolutely a 3-player war game. It's just not on a hex map. So Ken Kloby, you have to see the war, all 3 modules. So I made a decision about 2 weeks ago that I was not going to order the war expansion and the War of the Pacific. And I was going to wait until Compass Expo and pick all 3 up then. And like 3 days later, they announced that they were sold out of the war and the war expansion. So
who's the designer?
Ernie Copley. So, and the war will not be reprinted. So I am disinclined to investigate a game system in which I will only ever be able to obtain one of the 3 pieces.
Oh, I see.
That's not an absolutely no, because I do plan on checking it out at Compass Expo, where Ernie will be running it. But at the same time, that's a factor in the equation of whether I'm going to pick it up or not. If I can't get the whole thing,
how do you know it's not going to be reprinted?
Because Bill said it's not going to be reprinted.
If it's sold out that quick, there's money to be made.
But it didn't. It wasn't even a real reprint. It was a restock based on that's a good point. Existing components that they had in the warehouse.
Ow.
So our NATO game, I will have a video when we're done. I anticipate that the NATO game will wrap up next week. We didn't play last night because one of our guys had something to do, and then I made plans for New World, and then his plans opened up, and I'm like, now I'm stuck with New World. So, but we probably will finish NATO next week, and I'll have a video on it after that, but it will not be live play or anything like that. My opinion is pretty high. It definitely has a really interesting dynamic, and I think if you're interested in that topic, it's a really nice choice. Brian Martin mentions the browser version of Battle for Moscow. I'm not sure I've seen that. Brian, is that available on like Tabletopia or someplace like that? I think that's what I recall.
Yeah, you know what a good subject to talk about?
I don't agree with Jeff on this, actually. I've played just a second, Dan, sorry. I've played several Sicily games that are hex and counter games, and you can split them, but they tend not to split that well. The natural split is one player plays the Axis, one other player plays the U.S., and the third player plays the Commonwealth. It only really works well in a relatively large game, and there aren't that many relatively large games on that subject. In fact, the only one I can really think of is the original Sicily Triumph and Folly, the OCS game from the Gamers. Anyway, Dan,
I was saying a good subject is digital games. For some reason,
I just picked that for tonight. Actually, we'll talk about that at some point.
Yeah, okay. Der Weltkrieg. That's a huge game. It
is, but you don't have to play the whole thing. And in fact, I suspect that usually when people play it, they don't. It's a big game, though. I mean, unless you're playing the West Front, which is really high density. It's a pretty big game. Any strategic level World War II in Europe game especially tends to break pretty neatly into 3 factions. Ken says, call the complete strategist in New York City. And here's what I was looking for. Doug mentions that Outreach and a lot of strategic level space games actually are multiplayer hex encounter, so they will accommodate 3 players. They may not be at their best with 3 players. I think Outreach actually plays really well with 3 players, to be honest.
Yeah, Kyle. For sure, I was.
Nathan from Web Guy History mentions the Axis Empires games, which I don't agree that Daisenso is a great 3-player game. Totaler Krieg is. Daisenso kind of sucks for the Soviet player. There's very little for the Soviet player to do. Web and Starship, geez, here's an obscure mention. We're catching up here. Der Weltkrieg, virtually any of the Der Weltkrieg games can be played 3-player. The problem with, say, the West Front, which is the most compact of the full-size games, it's 1 map, right? But the counter density is really, really high. So if you split it 3 ways, you're giving one of those 3 players 2/3 of the pieces, and that's probably not desirable. So that makes it's just going to play really slow. A lot of OCS games don't split well into 3 players for the same reason. We ran Blitzkrieg Legend 3 players twice in the last year, and it takes up that French player a long time to move because there's a lot of French army is huge. There's a lot of French pieces. There's a lot more French pieces than German pieces. Fall of the Third Reich. This is an interesting one. Another one of Ted's games, actually, and I think it's on the Compass Games hit list of games they hardly have any left of. This is supposed to be pretty good. I've heard good things about it as well. And I believe this is starts in 1943 with the Invasion of Sicily type of game. Agray Day mentions Medwar Sicily, which I believe is from Worthington. I had that on my list at one point. I wanted to pick it up, and it is Hex and Counter, and I never did get it.
Jeff Beeler, Waterloo could be played 3.
But it sucks 3 players because what does the Prussian player do for the first half day? So Jeff's saying there's 3 games on the 1894 Sino-Japanese War. Jeff, I'd love to hear about those, actually. I'd love to hear about your experiences with those. We will eventually have the rant about digital games. Dan's probably less apt to rant about that topic than I am. If Peter, if you're talking about the East Front der Weltkrieg, yes, you could actually split. There's a combined Tannenberg and Galicia scenario that you could play. One player plays the Russians, one player plays the Germans, one player plays the Austrians. It naturally splits that way. You will find that the Russian turn takes longer because the one Russian player takes longer to move his 2/3 of the pieces, right? Mike Anthony mentions Stellar Conquest. That's true. That's not at its best with 3 players either. And Agray Day mentions, I assume you're talking about the Avalon Hill Alesia, Caesar at Alesia game. That naturally splits to like 1 player versus like 8 players, actually. So Jeff Beeler, I'll have to check that out because I have this game. There is a 3-player coin game. Which game is the 3-player coin game? There's the 2-player coin game, Colonial Twilight. And I thought that the 3-player game, was that All Bridges Burning, or was that something that hasn't come out yet? Okay, so I agree completely with Carl on this. If you are playing the whole Totaler Krieg experience with both games, Totaler Krieg and Daisenso, Totaler Krieg being Europe, Daisenso being the Pacific, then what you have is you have a player playing the Western Allies, you have a player playing the Pacific Western Allies, you have a player playing the Axis, and then another player playing the Axis, meaning the Germany and Italy, and then another player playing the Japanese, and then one player playing the Soviets on both maps. And that works really well.
Bloody hell.
It's a big project.
How do you manage that?
The Soviets typically don't have that much to do on the Pacific map. All they have to do usually is look menacing enough that the Japanese do not attack them. Or if they do attack, then it's something like the actual conflict that happened where Zhukov repulsed the Japanese.
What about Flames of War?
That's a miniatures game.
No, what am I thinking of?
World in Flames?
I know, Australian design group there.
World in Flames.
World
in Flames.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, okay. So World in Flames very naturally splits into 3 factions, okay, and it plays great that way. But it's a big project. Well, I mean, it's a big project. It depends on what scenario you're playing. If you're playing like just Europe or just the Pacific or something like that, those are enjoyable games, but they don't split well 3 ways. Just Europe would be okay, actually. But if you're playing like the whole world, then yeah, it works great. It works great with 3 players. Leipzig could easily accommodate 5 players. You could handily get a 5-player Leipzig game going. Actually, I'd be very tempted to do that with the Library of Napoleonic Battles.
So when you're playing like a 6-player hex and counter game, first of all, that's a monster game, period, for sure.
Almost certainly it is, yeah.
So, okay, before your turn
I don't think it has to be necessarily, but I think it is. I think almost all war games, hex and counter war games that can be split to that many players, almost all of them are monster games. I don't think that's necessarily an inevitability, but I think it's a practical inevitability.
So it's inevitable. There's a lot of downtime.
That's not necessarily inevitable either. There's a lot of games that often there is. Often the answer to that is yes. But a lot of times a design might have a turn sequence that's fairly interactive so that the defending player has a lot to do, or so that it's like an alternating impulse game system, for example. So that's a thing that you could do. Like World of Flames, there's typically not that much downtime. There'll be downtime at like when you're doing the production and stuff, because that's fairly fiddly, but you're going to take a series of impulses. So there'll be an axis impulse and then an allied impulse and an axis impulse and an allied impulse. And the individual impulses may not necessarily take that much time. So
in a typical sequence of play, your turn, how long does it last on the average?
If it's an well, it depends. I mean, some games it's 3 minutes, and in other games it might be 3 hours. So when we played Atlantic Wall, which is the big this Atlantic Wall, okay, starting on June 6th. We actually started the game on June 7th. We did June 6th before the convention, so we could just come and set it up and then not have to worry about the landings. The movement, right, which was it's 80% plus of the turn, and this is true with OCS too. 80% plus of the turn is moving, because almost every piece is probably going to move, or at least you're going to consider moving every piece. You're not going to fight with every piece. That would take 2 or 3 hours for one side to complete its movement.
So, okay, when you move, let's say you're moving your first 1,500 chits. Mm-hmm. When does battle occur? Is it instant, the battle, when something happens? Or are you moving and then you got to go to battle?
But again, it depends. So unconditional surrender, okay? The way things work in that is there's no like, this is the movement phase. There's an activation phase where you say, I am activating this unit, and I spend the point, and then that unit has X number of action points or movement factors with which it can do things, including a move and or attack. So in that case, you're actually attacking one unit at a time as that unit moves. And then you could do like concentrated attack, like static attacks too. But in a lot of games, there are overruns, so there can be combat during the movement phase. OCS does this, for example. So, and in general, at least if you're playing the Germans, there will be a decent number of overruns, or at least a few overruns each turn that the Germans have something to do, unless it's one of those late war situations where the Germans are just on the run the whole time.
And Nardi, what about, like, because I'm thinking tactical, obviously, there's going to be no opportunity fire and stuff like that. But what about surprise moves on a flank or something? Does that happen, or is it just frontal fight? You know what I'm saying?
Well, I mean, hopefully the game takes that into account. So a good example, actually. So the example I'm going to use is the new NATO from Compass, but Great Campaigns of the American Civil War does this too. So And actually, that's a great example, right? Great campaigns, the American Civil War. You're moving one set of units at a time. You're doing an activation, and that activation might be one unit or it might be multiple units, but you're running one stack at a time. But let's say you then go and conduct an attack with one of those stacks. One of the things that you look at is your zones of control adjacent to that target unit, and that gives you direct DRMs on the combat roll. Okay. NATO is a little more straightforward in that you can have a flank attack in which you get a decent, but it's a one column shift, which can be significant, right? Or you can have a concentric attack, in which case all 6 hexes are occupied by your zones of control around the target unit, right? Which is two shifts in your favor. So even in situations where you might think it's just, hex is moving forward and the line moves forward and you move forward a hex, you can engineer situations where you can outflank units, enemy units, and those newly positioned friendly units can then offer you bonuses on further attacks, or can isolate enemy units. And you isolate a stack in OCS for one turn, and there's an excellent chance that stack is just hosed. So
and this is a surprise move.
It can be. Yeah, well, it depends if it's surprise or not. That's a different topic. In many games, there is a surprise mechanism. World in Flames has one where you get a bunch of variety of different bonuses if it's a surprise impulse.
I see.
Again, NATO has like the first turn it isn't necessarily depending on the scenario, but it can be a surprise turn in which you get a miscellaneous bonuses during that turn.
Okay, so it's not a surprise where stuff. You're working for this surprise, right? You're building up for this surprise.
Generally speaking, yeah. So you could also have you can fool your opponent too, right? And this is something that happens with OCS.
I see.
In that, so if we're playing OCS, I am not allowed to examine your stacks. Okay. And I don't speak for any other OCS players, but if it's important, I hide it. You have to have a combat unit on top of the stack, and that's the only requirement. Otherwise, you cannot examine enemy stacks. So if I have headquarters, if I have supply units, if I have extenders, if I have panzer divisions, sometimes I'll put them on the bottom so that the other guy doesn't know where they're at. And sometimes I'm lucky enough to pull that off where it's like, I didn't think you had these 3 Soviet tank corps here. Oops.
Okay.
That happened. Where did that happen? That happened in Third Winter, actually, where there was a big German counterattack, and my German opponent was very surprised to learn that those 3 weak-looking stacks that he thought he was going to pounce on and attack were actually 3. One small unit under that was a full strength or nearly full strength Soviet tank corps.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's beautiful.
So, it was fantastic.
Yeah. I get it.
So, and what happens is he ends up getting a crappy retreat result, but then he loses his AR-5 unit that led the attack. I lose an AR-3 unit that who cares, right?
So basically you're breaking in his line. You're going through.
Yes.
Overrunning.
Conversely, the same thing is happening also in Third Winter. Actually, I was playing the Germans, and I had what I felt like was a nice little defensive line on the Dnieper, right? I'm like, this isn't even my command, right? I'm running it for some other guy that's not there that day. The Soviet player, who was a very experienced, very skilled OCS player, opened me up like a can of cheap sardines. Just ripped a huge hole in the line. Soviet tank formation start pouring through it. I'm like, oh man, this is bad. It's bad. Retreat. But it was great. I mean, I was on the receiving end, but it was actually great to see. So,
actually sounds like a lot of fun.
Technically, Jeff, this is probably something you can do. I don't do this.
Okay, what's he talking about?
So the supplier counters, right? You have supply counters that are on the map, and what Jeff is saying is you can make a stack look huge just by putting like four one-token counters under it.
Yeah.
You can do that, but the edges of the supply counters are white, and the enemy can normally tell when there's a supply in the stack. Now, what I do is sometimes I keep making changes. I'm spending the supply out of a big supply dump, and then I won't consolidate that change at the end. So I'll end up with 7 supply counters that could be consolidated into 2 supply counters, but I don't consolidate them because I want him to think I have an enormous supply dump sitting there. So, or sometimes I want to consolidate it because I don't want him to know that there's a supply dump there at all, right?
Yeah, that's a
deception is a thing. That's actually one of the things I really like about OCS is there's never certainty about what you're facing on either side. This wasn't supposed to be about OCS, but so we'll be playing. Let me mention that Origins is this weekend. I will be there Friday and Saturday, and it's sounding like Sunday too. And Thursday, but Thursday in the evening, I'm not doing anything on Thursday except walking around and talking to people. I will be running Commands and Colors, Napoleonics on Saturday and Friday. So do stop by the Armchair Dragoons area in the big exhibit hall, and I will say hi.
And Artie, what's that costing you, man?
Nothing.
To go to Origins.
It'll cost me about $15 a day to park. That's it.
And you're getting a media pass?
I got a GM's badge.
Okay, so me, I've got a nothing pass. I want to go for the whole shebang. What's it going to cost me?
Well, first of all, you don't just do that. You talk to me first, off camera.
But I'm just saying.
You put in for a media pass. And
no, a regular Joe.
Oh, this year I think it's $60, $50 or $60, something like that.
For 4 days?
Yeah.
What a steal.
I think it's usually more, but this year is, half a show, so we'll see how that works. I know it's $30 for 1 day.
No, that's good money for your value. Value for your money.
But you compare this to like a comics convention, like the
shabby.
Yeah, I mean, Origins. People complain, they raised the Origins badge price to $70 for.
Go to a Comic Con.
Go to Marcon, man. It's like $150, and you get to see. I mean, if you're there for games, you're going to be disappointed.
Yeah, of course. But you're there for the costumes.
Oh, this is a terrible idea, Jeff. This is a terrible idea. Don't tell people to do this. This is dumb. You should respect the drawn strength chits. We should talk about this system actually, because not today because we're out of time. But the Victory in the West system, super important and influential design. I don't believe that's the intent. Let me put it that way. But it's a well, John. This is why the best Civil War system is Great Campaigns of the American Civil War, at the operational level anyway, because it reflects the difficulty of executing those maneuvers, because the timing has to be exactly right. And in the so I'd expect conventions on the West Coast to be more expensive because it's more expensive out there.
Yeah, but I paid $80 to go for 1 day to Comic Con in Montreal. 1 day, $80.
Okay, what'd you do? I mean, what'd you do at Comic Con for 1 day?
I bought sleeves, card sleeves.
See, I'd consider that to be a bad deal. But that's me. Travel and lodging expense is considerable. So I would like you to think of. I don't want to use a week-long event as an example, but let's say Origins, right? You don't live in Columbus, Ohio, and I could take an Uber to or have my wife drop me off at the convention.
We'll come and stay at your place, Artie.
If you bring a tent, you can absolutely pitch it in my backyard. I have tons of space. I could lodge the entire wargaming hobby in my backyard.
Hey, it's a plan. There's
also one bathroom, so bear in mind. So let's say you're coming to Origins from out of town, right? Let's say you can drive, right? Let's say you live in Cleveland, right? And I did this, right? It's a 2-hour drive. You don't want to do it every day, but you drive down on Wednesday or Thursday. You're staying 3 or 4 nights in a hotel, right? That 3 or 4 nights in the hotel is going to probably run you at the convention hotel something like $90 to $150. That means that the lodging cost could be $300 or $450. And that's a substantial amount of money to go to a convention. So there's ways to allay this, right? If you split the room, if you say, hey, Joe Bob, my gaming buddy, come to Origins with me, and then we'll split the hotel 2 ways. And then instead of costing $450, it costs me $225 and you $225, and that's not that bad, right? You split it 4 ways
for $450 for a room
for 3 or 4 days. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So this is Ohio. Hotel expenses are not that high in Ohio, but for Origins, I expect the hotel to cost as much as $150 if you're in one of the 3 attached hotels. If you're lucky enough to get those reservations. There are other states where hotels are more expensive. Another thing that doesn't tend to happen in Ohio is if you add people to the room, they add money to the cost of the room. That doesn't usually happen in Ohio. That does happen in Arizona, where Consim World Expo, if you get 4 people to your room, you split it 4 ways and it's less per person, but they also raise the cost considerably. It's also typically not that comfortable to fit more than 2 or 3, maybe 3 people in a hotel room, but depends if the hotel has rollaway beds and that kind of stuff. So yes, travel and lodging is usually the lion's share of the cost on this.
Yeah, of course, man, of course. And don't beer.
I spend money on whiskey. I don't know about you guys, but that's just me. 30 Macallan 25 is expensive, man.
God, man, you got bucks.
I don't. Somebody, so this is before the whiskey boom. This is about 15 years. Yeah, it's about 17 years ago.
It was still expensive, 25
years. Oh, it was. It was $2.50 a bottle, but it was, you know, God, you could get a pour of Macallan 25 for about $30. Now it'd be $150, and I'm not paying that. But that's how I've tried Macallan 25. Is back when it was $30 a pour. Somebody bought a round. Good guy to know, right?
Yeah. Look at Carl. Let's boot him out right now. Let's boot him out.
Diet soda. Hey, I drink diet soda. There's nothing wrong with diet soda.
And you might as well
drink regular.
There's an aspartame in it. You might as well do heroin. It's better.
I think I drink Diet Mountain Dew, and I don't think it uses aspartame. It's got lots of caffeine in it.
God, you just grossed me out.
So. Diet Mountain Dew. It's not any grosser than the regular Mountain Dew, frankly.
That's disgusting just to begin with, yes.
So, yeah, we got to get you down. Maybe once the pandemic is closed up and we have the situation under control, we can get you to come down here to one of the big events in the U.S.
Yeah,
maybe not just WBC.
I got to do it.
I mean, what kind of drive would it be to Hartford, Connecticut for you?
I think it'd be 6 hours, man.
That's not that bad.
No, it's not that bad.
Now it's in November. You could have bad weather that would throw that off. But
I'm Canadian. Bad weather. Yeah. Give me a break. I got tires that'll cut through anything.
No, that's true. You've probably got every Canadian has a monster truck, and if the monster truck breaks down, they can just ride their moose to whatever destination they have in mind.
I wish. You know, man, it's funny that you say that. I remember once there was a snowstorm, a little snow something in South Carolina, and like 50 people died.
Mm-hmm.
Like, seriously?
Mm-hmm. So, Doug, when we drove back from Denver, we drove through the Dakotas. We didn't hit Montana, and I think we stopped in South Dakota, and I think we ended up paying $150 a night for some pretty shabby hotel room. It was that or sleep in the car, because we had to sleep at that point.
But yeah, so, John Sy, obviously travel for you is massive.
Yeah, I looked at what it costs to fly to Europe nowadays, and it's crazy, because I could fly to Orlando for $60. But London, it's like $2,000. So forget it. So yes, totally. Jeff is. No one would drink it if it had no caffeine. I'm telling you, there's one reason to drink Mountain Dew, and it is, unless it's mixed with vodka, then that's fine too. I buy the cube at Costco, so it's like a 36-pack.
God, Mountain Dew sucks, man. It's bad. My teeth.
All soda's bad for you. It's not. It's a little higher in sugar than Coke, but I don't know that it's higher in sugar than Pepsi. If you're one of those lunatics that drinks Pepsi,
just drink beer.
Beer is better. Beer is literally better for you than soda.
Yes, just drink beer. Just drink beer.
If you're drinking 15 of them a day, then you got a problem, right? But if you're drinking one a day, beer is better for you than soda. That's absolutely true.
Yeah, and who drinks one beer a day, Artie?
I don't drink. I drink 0 beers a day. So,
oh God, I'm in the wrong.
And it's not that I don't like beer. It's that if I have a beer, I then need to go, and I don't want to go to bed yet.
Yeah, but you drink hard stuff. You don't go to bed.
No, it's not as filling.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Capiche. Capiche.
Yeah. All right, so we're overtime. Gatorade and tequila. When we were doing the camping thing, it would be frequently a thing that people would drink would be Everclear and
oh,
Gatorade.
Jesus Christ!
Yeah, that's bad. That's bad news right there.
Look, tequila's to be sipped. It's a beautiful thing. It smells like.
Oh, if you get the good tequila, yeah, that's absolutely right. You got to get the good tequila though. Don't get Cuervo.
No,
there's actually better Cuervo than the regular Cuervo, but
yeah. No, yeah.
Jeff, I will try to do some live video from Origins. Yes, that is the plan. Which means I got to get out the selfie stick for tomorrow. So, all right. So, guys, we got to go. I appreciate everybody sticking with us during the trials and tribulations. More people on Twitch tonight watching probably because all the other streams got screwed up. Wave bye, Dan. Everybody have a great night.
Thanks, Artie, for that lesson, huh?